Welcome to Bellingham Voices. I'm Marie Marchand. My guest today is Yaritza Esqueda. Yaritza is a student at Western Washington University and coordinator of the Social Issues Resource Center, otherwise known as CIRC. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I'm really happy to have you here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Let's start out by having you talk about your experience at Western and what your major is and how that's tied in with your work at the CIRC.
Okay. I'm a fourth year at Western. I've been a sociology major for about a year now. So I started in fall. I got admitted. And so I've always been really interested in sociology. I'm an education and social justice minor. Sociology, to me, I had taken my first class of sociology when I was in high school. And I thought it was so interesting the way that we study, society. And I really liked it. And so when I took that class, I remember asking my teacher about generations and how there's Generation Z, there's Generation Y, Generation X, the millennials, there's the baby boomer generation, and I was really interested in that. But at the same time, I didn't feel like I could really relate to some of those because my parents were immigrants from Mexico, and so I just thought it was kind of strange. Like I was like, oh, okay, well, let me ask him, like, can this be applied to myself because of that? And he didn't really have any answers for me, and so I was really kind of taken aback, but I just thought, like, okay, that's kind of normal. Maybe like this just wasn't for me, but I just couldn't relate to the topics as much because of that. And once I came to Western, started thinking about sociology, started kind of getting deeper into that, and I realized that was kind of a really problematic way that I started like thinking about education and how it wasn't catered towards my needs. It was kind of catered towards the students. It was like one kind of student. So, and it was like white students who had lived in like the U.S. for like multiple years, and then I knew, I was like, wow, like that's, looking at the demographics of the school, it was a 60%, like it's like the diversity was really high. Like I think it's about 60% Latinx students at my old high school because I come from Burien, which is in South Seattle. And so then I started thinking about like, wow, this curriculum was not catered for these students. It was catered for one certain student, and it was really reflected upon the curriculum. And that's when I started really looking at sociology and looking at how there are aspects of sociology that I can apply into my life. And yeah, so that's how I really started. And then that in itself, sociology, you talk a lot about society, you talk a lot about institutions, and that has a lot to do with social justice as well. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I started getting involved with social justice movements and how there's been a lot of problems within institutions, within the U.S., within other countries as well. And that's how I started really getting into social justice. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And when you look at the discipline of sociology and you're mm-hmm. saying that you don't find yourself represented, mm-hmm. do you see opportunities then for you to push the bounds of identity in terms of what that discipline believes?
Yeah, exactly. So that's exactly why I started getting really into sociology, because I was like, okay, here's here's a chance for me to expand it, like you said, expand the what we know about sociology and what we know about race, ethnicity, education, and that's really what I like to focus on: education and race, and how they work and don't work together sometimes. So yeah, that's exactly it. I really like looking at. I mean, once I came to Western, I did know there was much more opportunities for students to find. Well, I started taking race and ethnicity classes, and those are the classes where I could really identify and be like, wow, this is somewhere where my identity is really being brought out, and now I can really talk about these issues that really concerned me in the past, and yeah.
Mm-hmm. In the movements that are going on that you alluded to, mm-hmm. it seems like, whereas in the past maybe they were anti-war, for mm-hmm. example, but now it seems like And the civil rights movement was about race too, but now it seems that there's a big push in our society for racial justice as part of social justice. And it makes sense in so many ways because of the violence against people of color. In 2050, that's the year that it's going to switch, and the majority is going to become the minority, and minority majority. So what do you see as the implications of that change, but then also now what's going on with racial justice efforts?
Yeah, so right now, I think one of the biggest movements that we've heard a lot about is the Black Lives Matter movement, and which is like an amazing movement. And we actually had a speaker come who was one of the people who kind of one of the founders of like the Black Lives Matter movement. Her name is Fumiola Fagbamila, and she was here just a little bit ago. We were talking about that, and I think that where we are moving towards in society, it's inevitable that the U.S. will become less white in the future. What that means, I think that that's like a really great opportunity for now we will have more people being represented in certain fields that were previously not represented, like Congress, and there's just a lot of places like decision making. That more people will become represented, and therefore more people will become, will have more benefits and have more experiences. Their experiences will be acknowledged, and I feel like that's something that we definitely are having a hard time seeing right now. But yeah, that's
part of Western's mission is to support and empower a diverse community. Do you feel that as a woman of color, your diversity is acknowledged and valued, or how do you feel about that on campus?
Well, it's complicated. I'm in a very privileged position that I go to an institution in general, that I go to higher education. So I have to acknowledge that first. But I would say that in general, I don't even necessarily think it's Western. I think this is a common thing within college campuses, that a lot of women and people of color have not been listened to. For example, Western last year, there was a student who was convicted of rape and sexual assault, and he was readmitted back into Western. And what that says about Western is that they do not value the students, especially the women on campus. And that for me and a lot of students on Western's campus, that was very shocking, and that was very, we did not feel like Westerns had their best intentions, their best interests in us. As being a woman of color, well, there's a lot of problems within like education, that makes it so that once we do get into higher education, there's so much push for us to get into higher education, but once we are in higher education, the retention rates are really high, because we don't have the resources that we need, because we have, the institution wasn't made for us. And so there was a lot of retention rates because of that. When it comes to academics, finding communities can be really, really difficult, because we want to find a community in these spaces that we can talk to and feel comfortable with, and sometimes it can be really complicated and really tough to find those communities.
There's a lot of talk in society, which is probably a good thing, but I want your opinion on it to see how it can be improved or whatever. I'm white. How can white people be allies to the movement, right?
There's so much, actually, but I think the most important part is to believe us and listen to us and pass the mic over to us, and let us speak on what these issues are and what we feel, and to actually listen. And that's the biggest part, just to listen. That's really important, and to use that privilege. Use it. If you see something wrong, sometimes we can't speak out on those things, because then we're gonna look like the angry person of color, or that we're too sensitive, or certain things like that. And I think that it's really important to use that privilege to be like, hey, like I am a white person, and I don't think that's okay, So that's one of the things that I've seen that have been the most helpful. And same goes with like myself. Like I'm a very light-skinned person of color. Like I'm a very light-skinned, like I'm almost white passing, or I am white passing. And so whenever I see colorism within my own communities, I use that opportunity to speak out and say like, hey, I didn't really appreciate what you did there, or why are we valuing, this lighter skin tone as opposed to, darker skin tones and certain things like that, because that's really prevalent within my own community. So yeah, that's something that, yeah.
I wanted to give an opportunity for you to unpack certain words for us, the viewers. One is colorblind racism. I imagine that a lot of people think that maybe colorblind is good. So I want your opinion on that.
Right. Yeah.
And then a term you used in our conversation off air was intersectionality. So if you can maybe unpack those two for us.
For sure. Okay. So colorblind racism, a lot of people believe that, we're living in a post-racial society because we had a black president. That means that the end, like racism is over. I guess now we're seeing that maybe not. And so colorblind racism was kind of a way to be like, oh, see, like we don't have to see color. Seeing color is not necessary because, we're all equals. And that can be really problematic because when you're not seeing someone's for what their skin color is, for who they are, for their ethnicity, then you are kind of ignoring a whole part of their identity and what they've experienced in their life. You kind of see them as a blank slate, and people aren't blank slates. They've had experiences, they've had traumatizing experiences, they've had a lot of things happen in their lives that have gotten them to where they are now. And so when you don't acknowledge those things, you really are erasing a part of their own identity. Yeah.
And in addition to traumas, I mean, there's probably beautiful things. There's beautiful things about my culture that I enjoy.
Right, exactly.
So erasing that good part too,
exactly.
right?
Yeah, exactly. Erasing the things of their own culture that they embrace, that they are proud of, that they, that's something that people, they have pride in their own culture. A lot of folks have pride in their culture, and so not erasing that part of their identity. And intersectionality, this is something that's been, I think it's been floating around in the like social justice realm a little bit for a while now. I think this was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, and she's like a really like amazing person, and I'm just like a really big fan of hers. But she coined the term intersectionality, which in her works is where it first started to come up, and she talks about it as being. She talks about this case that occurred I think in the 80s. I'm not really sure, but maybe not. I think it was before that. But it was these women who were being discriminated against because they were applying for a job, and in the laborial part of the job, they were not. They were hiring mostly black men. In the offices, they were doing like more like office work. They were hiring white women. And so they were realizing like we're being discriminated not just because of our race, but also because of our sex. And kind of intersectionality is just seeing how your identity holds multiple facets. I can use myself as an example. I'm a woman of color because I'm a Chicana. I am a woman, so I face sexism. But I am also privileged because I go to a higher education. I have a college education, and I'm also light-skinned, and I have white passing privileges. And so acknowledging all those different things of your own identity really helps you navigate in the world. So not erasing those parts of their identity, because that makes up who they are.
For example, people with a disability, I mean, they wouldn't all be lumped together because there's multiple aspects of them and multiple resources and strengths.
Exactly. Too. So a queer person who is in a wheelchair, they have the people might be they might face discrimination through ableism and through heterosexism. So, sorry, that was like kind of like twitchy, but yeah, like they would face different ways of being discriminated, and so we can't just see their identities as being separate from each other because they all make up who they are.
There's so much I want to talk with you about, so that's why we're just kind of going from one topic to another. But what I wanted to ask is definitely about Cirque.
Oh, yes.
And you mentioned the Black Lives Matter founder coming to speak, which was awesome. So what are some other things that Cirque does?
Okay, yeah. So she was one of the founders because like it was a lot of folks who helped with the Black Lives Matter movement. But yeah, so the Cirque. We bring in lots of different speakers. We create events. Some of the speakers that have come in the past, like last year, we had it was like a collaboration between a lot of different offices. Sometimes it's majors, sometimes it's minors, and just again like other offices. When we brought Angela Davis, and that was like one of our biggest events like ever, and so there's no way we could ever top that. Well, I mean, yeah, maybe, but like this year we brought in other speakers as well, and so but Angela Davis was something that a lot of people came to, and a lot of people showed up for, and it was amazing. And the way that they organized it was so well organized, and it was really cool. So I give props to the previous Cirque coordinator. She's really amazing. She still works at Western, and so she's really great. She's been helping me along the way, just giving me pointers. But we've also had Chedi Moraga come before. We also do events. They're not necessarily focused on having speakers, but they're focused on kind of building a community and kind of focusing on, we call it like his resistance and healing. And so within spaces of social justice, there's a lot of, you're constantly thinking about oppression or being oppressed. And so in those spaces, that can be really, really draining on a day-to-day basis for students. You're already in school, you're thinking about all these different things and you want to make a difference, but and all these things are really overwhelming and really stressful. So we do a lot of events catered around healing. And so I think our first event was called Snacks with the Cirque. And so we had food available. We had little Tupperwares available for if anybody wanted to come and put some food in, then take it home, they can reuse it. They had our office number on it, and so people could come in whenever they wanted and kind of talk. And some people do just come into the office and we just talk about what they've been seeing, if they just want to keep know that there's other people out there who are listening and understand where they're coming from, or if they're just worried about something, we're there to listen as well. And if students really feel the need that they need to go talk to someone, we can walk them to the counseling center. We have lots of resources for students, not necessarily related to social justice, but just in general, health and well-being. The other offices as well, they have a lot of different resources for them. We have a library, and the library is amazing. We have so many books on pretty much anything you could ever think of related to social issues. But I know you were going to ask me about the ROP, so yeah.
So the Cirque is part of an umbrella organization that's student-led?
Yes.
Is that right? Oh,
yes,
okay.
It is. So it's an umbrella, it's the resource and outreach programs. And so there's a lot of really great offices. So there's the Women's Identity Resource Center, the Queer Resource Center, the Disability Outreach Center, the Legal Information Center, the Veterans Outreach Center, and I hope I didn't leave anyone out. But yeah, so they're all really great offices. And so if you ever need safe sex supplies, menstrual, what are they called? Menstrual products, hygiene products, menstrual hygiene products, anything like that, you can find it in the resources and outreach programs. And they create lots of different events. The Queer Resource Center put on an event called they have an annual drag show. And so that's something that gets so much turnout, and they sell tickets and the money goes to local charities that support queer, actually I don't really know, but I do know it does go to charities. I think the Women's Identity Resource Center annually hosts like a sustainability period, and so it's we talk about how to have like a very sustainable period, and like what products are best, and talking about as well birth control expos and getting different members from the community to come out and talk about birth control and different methods of birth control. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow. How can students who are watching get a hold of you?
Oh, yeah. So, well, pretty much I'm in Viking Union. It's room 512. And pretty much that, or we have an email. It's as.circ@ww.edu. Let me think of any other way they can get a hold of us. We have a Facebook page. We have a Twitter. Mm-hmm. And that's just AS Circ, and I think both of them are just AS Circ. And so that's usually like the way that most people know about our events is through our Facebook, actually, because we create events on Facebook. We invite people invite other people, and then they all show up to our events, and we're like, oh, great, the publicity worked. So, yeah, that's yeah.
Are some of the events open to also general public, like non-students? Okay.
Oh, for sure, yeah. There's usually when we have speakers, we don't really. It doesn't matter who comes to it. Like that's open to the public. Same goes with. So yeah, when we have speakers, and pretty much any event, I think all of our events are open to the public. They're sometimes we have closed student spaces, but aside from that, most things are open to the public. Yeah.
Okay. So just talking with you, I feel really hopeful. I mean, because you're the next generation and you have so much excitement and knowledge around these issues. Mm-hmm. The other day, I was at the rally that the high school students put together with 2,000 people, high school and middle school, and I just cried. I mean, I stood there taking pictures while they sang, facing City Hall, and it just made me feel good that it's like, okay, here's the world, here you go. Yeah. You're going to do better than I could do. So I just felt really good about that. Mm-hmm. I'm going to bring up some scary statistics first before we move into, I want to know what your vision of the world is. But I wanted to talk about some statistics from the Southern Poverty Law Center about hate groups. And there's been a 4% increase in hate groups since last year. Mm-hmm. And they track by state. Mm-hmm. So in our state, we have 26 hate groups, and including one here in Bellingham. It's an anti-Muslim group called Fortress of Faith. So obviously, this is disconcerting for everyone. What are your feelings about this rise, and how could it be stemmed, and what's going on from your viewpoint as a young person?
Right. So, this is something that honestly, I predicted this, but like I think a lot of people predicted this. Since the last, since Trump got elected, things have gotten. I think people have been more comfortable being in hate groups because there hasn't really been any backlash on it, and there's been kind of like there's an uprising in this sort of way. There hasn't been any media hasn't really presented them as being too threatening. From what I've seen, they don't really cover this at all, from what I've seen as well. And so this is really concerning. A lot of these groups, they are gaining a lot of attention, and they've been getting a lot more followers. It worries me about the Muslim communities who are in Bellingham, but I also know that Bellingham in general has had historically, Skagit and Whatcom County have had really high amounts of KKK members. Bellingham, I think, had the biggest following of KKK members, or they had the biggest KKK rally in Washington State, and that was in the 1920s. And so, history, what we saw then, there's still, things that kind of just pass on from generations, and people who still kind of hold those same ideas. And I think that there's been a lot of anti-Muslim sentiment because of a lot of the laws that have been trying to ban these Muslim countries from Muslim folks who are trying to get into the country, and banning them from getting into the country. And it's really disappointing, and it's not even just disappointing. It's like, it's frustrating, it's angering, and like a lot of people feel so much feelings towards this, and it's disappointing, to say the least. And I don't know, I feel fear for Muslim communities that live in Bellingham, and I want them to know that like we want, like Western, I can't speak for Western as a whole, because Western as a whole is a completely different, separate thing, but there are communities out there. I know that the Ethnic Student Center, we have folks on campus who have communities, and we do form our own communities, so look for those communities. Because, and we're here for you, because like as like ESC clubs, we are different from Western as a whole. I think that as ESC clubs, Ethnic Student Center clubs, we are there for each other, and we try to support each other. The greater Bellingham community, I think we look out for each other a lot. And so, because I know that there has been some anti-Muslim sentiment on campus. Yeah, so I think the ESC is a place where you can find students that have been through similar experiences, and the CERC, the ROP in general, and SEED as well, the Center for Education, Equity, and Diversity, that is in Miller Hall, and that's a place where it's a beautiful space where people can come in and feel very comfortable. There's always food there for students, but especially if you're feeling that if you're feeling that you are being attacked, or if you feel unsafe in certain ways, like that's where I would go.
Okay.
SEED in particular, yeah.
Great. Thank you for conveying that information to folks.
Mm-hmm.
You had mentioned your degree is going to be in sociology, and then you have a minor in education and social justice. Is that right? So is that in the Woodring College of Education?
Yes, it is. I think yes. So Woodring has ESJ, is what we call it, Education and Social Justice, and it's probably like the best decision that I could have ever made to be in that minor. The professors that are there, they're just so wonderful and so beautiful, and they provide so much hope and so much light and so much, just the readings that we do, like everything's just very transformative. Like you just really feel like there is hope for the future, and just you just really have like a different way of thinking and way of processing, like, and seeing the world once you start thinking in the ways of education and social justice, because education is such an important it's so important to society, and so through education and through kind of destructuring education is where we feel like we find the most hope. So.
Nice.
Yeah.
So the hope, that's a good segue into how I wanted to kind of close the show, is to find out where you find hope.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times people movements are very hopeful, and there's also a segment of the reason why you're doing the movement is because there's an injustice going on, which is can be sorrowful and traumatic.
Exactly.
So talk about the hope part. If somebody out there is feeling hopeless, they don't vote, they don't feel like going to rallies makes a difference or whatever. I mean, how would you convey your hope to them?
Yeah, so I think that hope is something, I don't know, I think I see hope through youth, through like what you were mentioning, that you went to a rally and you saw these students out there, and that's where I feel like there's like the most hope. I see youth, and we are the youth as well, but I think that that's where I'm like, wow, like they're doing something, and they can do it. They're young and they can do it, like we can do something too. And I think that's beautiful, and I think that's where so much change happens, is through youth. Even ethnic studies, it came from something that it was in high schools that they demanded to be taught something different than the curriculum that was only focusing on the white students. They demanded that there was something that they were missing out on a part of their history, and the fact that some of these things, like, they actually do listen, and sometimes they actually do listen, and sometimes there are changes that are made, and that's where I feel like I get hope. But sometimes you look at the structure and you know that the structure as a whole is broken, and that's, you know, again, that's where you start thinking about the structure and how will there ever be a change, like a completely wiping out like what we know of like government, maybe in doing a completely different change. And you know, there are people out there who believe it, and I believe that too. Like there can be change, and it's for the better, and because we want something better for the future. And that's something that is so beautiful, to think that we want something for better. We are so selfless to think that, like, you know, we want this so badly that we don't care if we don't get that in our own experience. We like, you know, it doesn't have to be in our own lifetime. Sometimes it'll be in someone else's lifetime, but the fact that like someone will benefit from that. And I think that that's where I find hope. Even like the Multicultural Center, that came from the work of students who will never probably get to use the Multicultural Center. But we know that someday there will be students out there who will use the Multicultural Center, and they will appreciate it and appreciate the fact that we worked hard to get them that space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, those are beautiful words, Yaritza.
Thank you.
The next generation raising our level of consciousness for humanity, it sounds like. So,
yeah.
Well, I've really enjoyed our time together, and it's been enlightening. I've learned a lot, and thanks for stopping by.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for joining us for Bellingham Voices. We'll see you next time, and take care.